Hello, good afternoon, everybody. I'm glad that you are with us. Today, our conversation partner is Charlotte Cooper, and I'm so happy that Charlotte was able to be on Zoom with us because I know from our intergenerational discussions what a wonderful life story she has. Charlotte, how are you?
I'm fine. I'm doing very well. I'm feeling very safe and very well cared for, and I appreciate it very much. I
Wonderful.
think we're very fortunate to be here at this time.
Yeah. How are you during this time? I know I haven't seen you around much, so you're keeping at home?
Yes, I'm pretty much keeping at home. I'm okay. Friends come by, we sit outside or we sit inside at 6 feet apart.
Yeah.
So I don't feel alone
Mhm.
and lonesome. I do a lot of reading, which I enjoy doing. The
Wonderful.
only thing that is upsetting about this is my first great grandchild was born in March, and I
Oh.
can't go see her because of this pandemic.
Oh.
So, but that's really, other than that, you know, I feel like I'm safe and I'm well cared for, and everybody is doing the best they can.
Yes, wonderful. And I'm glad you're feeling safe. And congratulations on your first great grandchild. What's his or her name?
Her name is Noah Snow.
Wow, wonderful.
Yeah.
And have you been able to Zoom with them? Have you been able to? No.
No, I have not been able to do any of that. So,
Yeah. And so, Charlotte,
possibly,
maybe we want to mention that to the residents who don't know you that well. Your eyesight is
I have
not very.
macular degeneration,
Yes.
and
So it's not.
it's come to a significantly poor level now.
Mhm.
It's gotten quite a bit worse in the last 6 months.
Okay.
But there's still a lot of things I'm able to do. It's detail that I don't see. And I do a lot of things by feeling. I
Oh,
feel the elevator buttons and I feel the telephone and the
okay.
remote control. So there's ways to that I can accommodate some things, but some things are like I don't touch the stove. That would
Oh,
not be good.
good. Yes.
Yeah.
Wonderful. Good.
Yeah.
I'm glad. Charlotte, how about going back into your childhood first? Where were you born? What was your childhood like?
I was born in Worcester, Massachusetts.
Hmm.
I am actually, on my father's side of the family, I'm the first member of the 11th generation of his family
Oh,
to live continuously in Massachusetts in the same area.
wow.
My ancestors came to Carlisle, Massachusetts. They were farmers.
Mhm.
They built a homestead and a farmhouse, and that farm in 1680, and
Uh-huh.
that farmhouse is still there and people live in it.
Oh, wow. Still your
So
family?
no, not family members, not that we know of anyway. And this great granddaughter that was just born is the first member of the 14th generation.
Oh, that's
So
wonderful.
my sister reminds me, even though I've actually lived more of my years of my life in Florida than I did in Massachusetts, she reminds me, once a Yankee, always a Yankee.
Right. So you said your sister. How many siblings did you have?
I have a sister and a brother, both younger.
Hmm.
Yeah.
And both
And
both
one of
living
them,
in the United States.
I'm sorry?
Both living in the United States?
Yes, yes. My brother actually lives in Florida in Tavares. If you know where that is, it's next door to Mount Dora.
Okay. Hmm.
So I see him. My sister lives in Massachusetts.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Wonderful. So you grew up in Massachusetts. How
I
was your
did.
childhood? Any memory that sticks out for you in your
Oh yeah.
childhood?
My elementary school years, we lived in a town just outside Worcester, and I went to a 3-room school for my first 6th grade. So it was 2 grades in each room,
Hmm.
with one teacher for each class. But during that time, when I was, I think, 8 and 9 years old,
Hmm.
the high point of those early years was a new pet that my dad brought home one day. And it was a shiny black crow. And he was to be a pet in the family. And Dad had him in a cage, and he put the cage in the backyard and explained to us that the crow had to stay in the cage 2 nights and 1 day, and on the second day he could be let out. And during that time, he would learn his boundaries. He would come to understand that our yard was his yard. The time that he was in the cage, it was my job to feed him. And that involved taking a piece of bread, breaking it up in little pieces, dunking the bread in the milk and poking it down the bird's beak. That was supposed to go on for just a little while until he learned to dig worms for himself.
Oh.
So the second day came around and we were waiting breathlessly for my dad to let him out of the cage. And when he did, I was sure he was going to fly away. It is.
So hi, everybody again. We had a little glitch here with our recording, but I want to explain to you that Charlotte, because of her eyesight, was not able to go on Zoom on her own. So Arlene was so gracious and wonderful and said that she would help Charlotte, and Charlotte can record from her place. So it's wonderful. Thank you, Arlene. And Charlotte, let's go on with your story. It was so wonderful. So you were supposed to feed the bird.
Right.
Right.
Dip the bread in the milk and poke it down his throat.
Yes.
The second day, we were all very excited because now he could come out of the cage and hopefully he would stay in our yard. So he came out of the cage and he flew off, and I thought he was going to fly away, but he just went up and got on the roof of the garage, and he sat up there and he looked around for a while, and then he flew over. We had a tire swing hanging on a chain from a branch in the apple tree, and he went over there and sat on the swing and checked it out. And then he flew around in the yard and he found, we had a big grape arbor down in the backyard, and he really liked that because they were Concord grapes, and at that point they were just like little nuts. So he was enjoying that. And then he would fly high and he would come down and skim along the tops of the flower beds. He just kind of flew around. It was like he was checking out the yard. Then he went up to the top of the house and sat on the chimney and looked around. And then he flew down to where we were and landed right in front of us and walked around like, okay, this place looks pretty good. I'll stay here. So he was the height of fun and entertainment. We never taught him any tricks. We finally figured out that he was imitating things that he saw.
Oh.
I mean, he would, if my little sister was doing cartwheels, he would try to do that. He was able to do a backward flip at one time.
Oh my.
His big show tune was he would wrap one wing around his breast and hang the other one out on the ground and just drag it along. And he would weave down the backyard like he was drunk or he was an injured bird, and he just looked hysterical. And my dad took a lot of beating over that. Everybody would say, who is he imitating now? But we lived on a street that only had 6 houses. And so the mailboxes were all at the end of the street. And he knew what time my dad would get home from work. So he would fly down and sit on the mailbox, and Dad would come and get the mail out. And Jim, I had named the bird Jim, Jim would get on the hood of the car and ride home. When Dad went from the mailboxes up to our driveway, Jim rode along on the hood.
That's incredible.
He would pick up anything shiny, like a gum wrapper or a bottle cap. If it was shiny, he picked it up and took it up on the top of the garage roof and stuck it under the shingles. He would sit in front of my dad's car looking at himself in the chrome bumper. And sometimes he'd be picking at it as if he was trying to pull it off the car. He rode on the handlebars of my bike. He could go with me as long as I was just going to the store. He would not be able to go with me if I was going to stay at a friend's house, because then he'd lose track of his boundary. He knew the boundaries of his universe were our yard. So he would ride on the handlebars of the bike, and I'd go in the store and get the bread or whatever it was, and he'd just sit there and wait.
That's
on the
amazing.
handlebars. And when I came out, there would be people around there looking at him, and I was always afraid somebody would grab him when I was in the store, but no one ever did. I think his beak might have discouraged them. But they would ask me, "Is that a real bird?" And I would say, "Yes, it is. His name is Jim, and we have to go home now." And I'd ride home very promptly. But the most amazing thing he did was his visits to the girl across the street. She was about 13 years old, and she had polio. And in the afternoon on a nice day, her mother would put her out on the back porch. And her dad had rebuilt the steps to the back porch to have very low risers. So she was able to go up and down the steps with her big heavy braces on. And when Jim would see her out there, he walked. He never flew. He walked across the street and up the sidewalk beside the house and walked up those steps and jumped up on the porch railing. And he would sit up there and she'd talk to him and he'd talk to her. And he might do a trick for her, or he would go walk up and down on the railing and caw and talk to her. And when her mother brought her back in the house, he'd walk back down the steps and down the sidewalk and across the street and come home. And he never flew doing that.
That's amazing. It's almost like he was showing her, like, look at me,
I'm here to visit you. I hope you enjoy my visit.
Yeah.
But the business with the milk in the cup never went away. He was perfectly capable of digging his own worms and feeding himself, but he liked table service. So he never gave it up. And I had to be down there when dawn broke. Otherwise, for the neighbors, it would be like having a rooster in your yard. Because as soon as it was daylight, he wanted his breakfast and he would start calling for me.
Wow.
It was not a pretty sound. And he figured out which window on the second floor was my bedroom. And my bedroom window was over the porch roof. So he would get up on the porch roof and tap on the window first. And if that didn't get my attention, then he would start cawing at me. And I was not supposed to let that happen because the neighbors didn't appreciate it.
Wow.
But he was just the most fantastic, fun pet you could ever imagine.
Oh, I have never heard a story like that, Charlotte. That's amazing. Amazing. So did you have Jim your whole childhood, or?
No, I only had him probably less than 2 years. Our family was going on vacation for a week, and he was supposed to be at my uncle's farm. And all they had to do was the same requirement, keep him in the cage so he learns the boundaries of this property and he'll stay there.
Yeah.
But they had been at our house and seen him entertain, and they wanted to play with him. And so they didn't wait.
Okay.
They let him out too soon and he flew away.
Oh, I'm sorry. That must have been disheartening for you.
Yeah, it was a lot more than disheartening. I was really upset. So, but it was worth it for the time that I had him. So
what a wonderful, wonderful story. So it sounds like you had great experience during childhood. You went through high school, and
I'm fortunate to have great parents. My father, of course, had the long Yankee history. My mother is the only member of her family that was born in the United States. Her three brothers and her sister were all born in Sweden.
Oh,
So
okay.
she was born after they came here. And she was a bookkeeper and she was the family manager.
Huh.
She also had a beautiful singing voice. And she sang with a chorus, a large chorus. And she, of course, she sang in church. And most every Saturday she would be going off someplace to sing at somebody's wedding. But when she was young, before my dad came along, I think it was before, she had a radio program. She was on the radio for 15 minutes. She was the lady in purple.
Huh.
And she sang the popular songs of that day. So she said, my dad came along and then I came along and that ended her musical career.
Oh, did she ever sing to you like lullaby?
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
she would, when we went to bed at night, she would play the piano downstairs and sing while we went to sleep. It was really nice. We had to be quiet and listen and she would sing.
Oh, what a beautiful way to go to sleep.
Yeah.
How wonderful.
My dad was a machinist. He worked for MIT at their Lincoln laboratories, which were on Hanscom Air Force Base in Massachusetts. And they worked on government contracts. So he was working in the early days of satellite development.
Okay.
So he had a very extensive career and did a lot of traveling to interesting places and had lots of.
I know that you had an amazing career, Charlotte. I know a little bit about that from our intergenerational discussions, but how did you get there? How did you get to the amazing career that you had?
I had to. There was no choice. No, I was married very young, like a year out of high school. My husband was also very young. We were young and stupid, but thought we knew it all. And we did pretty well for the first few years. We managed to buy a house and we had 3 children in 9 years. And then I think we began to mature in different directions.
Yeah.
It was a good life until it wasn't.
Oh, good way to say it.
After I think about 13 years, I recognized that I could not continue on with it. It wasn't good for me, and it wasn't, worse yet, it wasn't good for my kids.
Yeah.
So I got a divorce, which meant now I'm the primary breadwinner. So I had to have a job. I'd been a typical 50s at-home mom for the last 10 years. So I found a job in a commercial insurance company. They insured corporations like General Electric and Kodak. And I worked on computer-generated accounting reports. And it wasn't math and that sort of stuff. It was more research work, looking for problems, out of balance situations, or something that was incorrect, something that was not where it was supposed to be. So my job was to identify anomalies in the report, figure out how they happened and what needed to be done to fix it. And I loved that job. But after about 3 years, I realized that I needed to make more money, and I couldn't really see an avenue, a pathway to doing that where I was. There were other positions that I could have taken, but I didn't like the work, and I didn't want to commit myself to that. So I knew that this company had a personal lines division, which was in Miami, and personal lines is the kind of insurance you and I have, like homeowners and auto and renters and boats and all of that. And so I looked into the possibility of transferring to that operation. And I had the woman who was the manager there was in the home office, which is where I was, frequently because we did the accounting for that division as well. And so when she was there, I asked to talk with her, and I explained that I thought I would like to try this and explain some of my personal situation. And she talked with me for quite a while. And then she said, let me think on this for a while, and I'll get back to you before I leave to go home. And the last day she was there, she called me to the office, and she had thought about it. And she said, so I will take you on. I understand that you have a house to sell. So when you sell the house and have a specific closing date, you call me and we'll set a start date for you in Miami, and we'll just go from there. And I said, okay. And I was stunned. I never imagined it was going to turn into a done deal in 1 week. It was just an idea I had a couple of weeks ago.
Yeah.
So I did. I sold the house, and I sold it by owner, as I had done with the house when I got the divorce. I sold that house as well myself, which gave me some funds to go on to the next step. So when I had the date, I called her. We came up with an agreed upon start date for me in Miami. And that Friday night, I got on a plane and flew to Fort Lauderdale, where my brother and his family lived. And my mother came and joined us on Saturday morning. She and my dad had retired to the East Coast in Jupiter. So she came to join us. And between Saturday morning and Sunday afternoon, I looked at 5 houses and picked out one, chose one. We got back to the realtor's office, and there were no secretaries there to type up the paperwork or the contract for sale. So my mother sat down and she did it.
You did it.
She typed up all the paperwork for me to buy that house. And
what about your kids? Were they all on board?
They knew. I had taken them to Florida for Christmas.
Okay.
So, and this was not long after that.
Yeah.
And I had said to them, what would you think about living there? And so they knew all about it.
Yeah.
So it's 7 o'clock that Sunday night. I'm back on the plane headed back to Boston, and I'm in a total panic. I'm sitting there thinking, I don't want to do this. I don't want to move to Miami. I don't want that house in Hollywood. I want my old house. Thankfully, I was at 35,000 feet, so I couldn't make any stupid move to blow the whole deal up. Because once I settled down, I was fine by the time the plane got to Boston. So we went home and we packed up, and on St. Patrick's Day, 1973, we left Massachusetts for Florida. I have a son and 2 daughters, and my son was 16 at the time, and he did not want to move with us, and he asked permission to stay, and he would live with his dad.
Yeah.
And I wasn't really wild about that idea, but on the other side, I thought it would be an education for him, because his dad's lifestyle looked like it was all ice cream and no vegetables.
That's good.
You really didn't know what it was all about unless you lived in it. And I thought it was probably a good idea before he got to be a man that he came to recognize that. And as it turned out, that was a good move.
Yeah.
So he did not come, but the girls and I moved. And so I got the girls in school and reported to my job as was scheduled. And I had 3 weeks, almost 4 weeks of training in the product that I was going to be working in. And then I was on the phone answering questions from policyholders, very heavily supervised, because to do that, you really have to have a license from the state of Florida.
Oh, okay.
And so my next step was to study for the exam, which just took my life. Florida has very difficult licensing exams. So I just took 3 or 4 weeks, and I either worked or I was at home studying. And the girls agreed to take care of themselves. They made their own suppers. They did their own laundry. And they were very helpful to me in being able to devote my time to studying. And my colleagues at the office kept telling me, don't get stressed out. Don't worry about it. You won't pass the first time. Very few people do, but you'll get to see what the test is like, and you'll be better prepared for the second time. And that really didn't sound very good to me, because I thought, if it's such a miserable thing to do, why would you want to do it twice? So I studied very, very hard, and I took the exam, and I passed it on the first go round, and there was a party.
Wonderful.
So now I've got the license, and I can really get my teeth into the job. And it was so interesting, because you're talking to people about things that are going on in their lives. You know, they have questions. I had a lady on the phone one day, and her husband had died, and he always took care of everything. And she was trying to learn everything that he used to do. And so she was reading her homeowner's policy, and she had a question. She had several questions, but one of her questions was, if the Russians came marching down my street and set my house on fire, would I be covered?
Wow.
And I had a really hard time saying no to her, but then I quickly came up with a half a dozen ways that her house might burn down and she would be covered. So that was okay. And I had a police officer who had shot himself in the foot accidentally when he was cleaning his gun, so he was home recovering. And he would call up every day, and he had found something that he had questions about, and he had really odd questions, events. And I realized after a few phone calls with him, his questions were based on things he had seen in his job.
Oh, yeah.
You know, so that was a whole new perspective. So, but it was a lot of back and forth like that. And a man called at after 4 o'clock on a Friday afternoon, and he had bought a boat, and he wanted to take it home, but the dealer was financing the boat and wouldn't let him take it until he had proof of insurance. And he was all in a dizzy, because he said, it's too far to drive across town, and I'm in Fort Lauderdale. And I said, just put the dealer on the phone, because I knew the dealer would know. And what he needed me to do was bind coverage, which meant he gave me all the specifications on the boat, and I gave him all the specifications on the insurance policy. And then I confirmed for him that the boat was covered under policy number such and such as of a certain date. And the man was then allowed to take the boat home so he could use it with his family on the weekend. And when I had the binder written, but I was going home, I wasn't going to do a policy at that hour. So I had it on my desk in my due first thing Monday pile. And when I came in, the first phone call was from that man, and the boat was in the bottom of the Intracoastal Waterway.
Oh, no.
It had been a terrible accident. The boat had sunk upside down with his 8-year-old daughter and her little friend inside the boat.
Oh.
But luckily, in the Intracoastal Waterway in Fort Lauderdale on Sunday afternoon, it's like 5 o'clock on the Howard Franklin Bridge. So there was a lot of boat traffic and a lot of people who could dive in and lift the boat up enough to get the girls out from underneath, and they were up on the seawall, and the rescue squad came.
Wow.
But the cause of the accident was a big, huge yacht that was a cabin cruiser. And because there was so much boat traffic, if you had a boat that had an antenna that you didn't want to take down, or it was a sailboat with a high mast, in order to go under the bridge would have to open. And
Yeah.
on the weekends, it was scheduled on the hour and the half hour. If there were boats waiting to go under that couldn't go under without the bridge opening, it opened on a schedule. And
Mhm.
this boat was coming along, this yacht, and they could see that they were not going to make it, which meant they would have to just sit there and wait for 30 minutes until it opened the next time. So
Mhm.
they gunned their engines
Oh,
and sped up the boat and just made it underneath the bridge in time. But they set up such a big wake that the wake is what turned the boat over.
oh my God.
So they were totally responsible for the accident, and they
Yeah.
just kept right on going. And
Wow.
their claims adjuster told me there were people standing in line to give a witness statement. They were so upset about what they had seen.
That's
Um,
good.
but but I still remember the name of the boat. It was the Marlin out of Houston, Texas.
Wow.
And they paid very dearly for having done that. Their
Wow.
boat was impounded. They were sued. The
Yeah.
Fort Lauderdale police had some criminal charges against them, but I don't know what they were. I don't know
Wow.
what kind of.
Charlotte, it sounds like you were involved and really helpful to all these people. Now, let's go on. I know your career went in a different
It did.
way, if not different. Computer age came on, and I remember you telling the story. What happened to you next? You embarked on an incredible career with
I did. I did. The insurance company decided to consolidate all its servicing offices in Dayton, Ohio.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't care to go to Dayton, Ohio. And at that point, I had a fairly new husband who had moved all the way from Buffalo, New York to marry me and live in Tampa.
How did that happen? And do we know him?
I will tell you that he was not very enthusiastic about going halfway back where he came from. Actually, he was a very old friend back from our days when I was married and he was married, and our families moved in to the same street at about the same time, and our kids were all the same age. So we did things together as a family and as couples. We went skiing and we went fishing. And eventually, he and his family moved to Buffalo. And I moved the next town over after the divorce. I bought a more reasonable house to manage. And so, right about the time when my job was disappearing because I didn't want to go to Dayton, Ohio, we ran into each other and got reacquainted.
Mm-hmm.
And we wrote back and forth, and he and his wife had been divorced for a while, and we had lost touch a couple of years after they moved. So we wrote back and forth, and he came and visited at Christmas in Florida, and I went to visit him at Easter, and long story short, we ended up getting engaged.
Mm-hmm.
And then the problem was, how do we do this? He lives in Buffalo and has a good job, and I live in Tampa and had a good job. So we decided that we would make an agreement. I would go to Buffalo and job hunt, and he would work while I was there. He would come to Tampa and job hunt while I was working, and whichever one of us hit first on a position that was as close as possible to what we already had, that's where we would live.
Wonderful.
And when I was in Buffalo doing my week of job hunting, I was remembering how at Easter, when I had been up there visiting him, he took me to see A Chorus Line.
Uh-huh.
That fantastic show.
Yeah.
And in that show, there is a line that says, "To die in Buffalo is redundant."
Oh.
So I'm driving around the city looking for places where I was going to apply for a job, and I'm remembering that line and thinking I might live here, and I'm convincing myself that would be okay. But luckily, he got a job here in Tampa that was very close to what he was doing in Buffalo.
Wonderful.
So I got lucky. I got to stay in
Yeah.
Tampa. And
So had you had moved to Tampa from Fort Lauderdale for a job?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. the company, actually MetLife, purchased the company that I was working for because they wanted to go into personal lines insurance. So I moved with that company to Tampa, and then subsequently to that is when they decided to centralize all their service centers in Dayton, Ohio.
Oh,
So they offered me a nice bonus if I would stay until the very last, the very dead end when everything would shut down. And I said if I was there, I would do that. But if I had the opportunity to get another job, I would have to look into it. And that very next Sunday, Citibank Travelers Checks had a big ad in the newspaper. And they were bringing their worldwide Travelers Checks Center to Tampa. And they had a long list of positions that they were hiring for. So I sent in a resume targeting one of the supervisory positions, which was a position that I was leaving. And they called me for an interview. I've never had such a bad interview. The man who was interviewing me was doing work on his desk and putting things in file drawers. And I was kind of a little extra thing on the side he was dealing with. And when I got home, I said to Bill, that's not going to work. He doesn't know if I can do the job he needs me to do, and I have no idea what that job is.
huh.
But a few days later, they called me and offered me a manager's job. And so, of course, I took it, and I was manager of refund investigations, which was if you bought travelers' checks and you lost them, you could call in and get replacement checks. So it was safer than cash.
Yes, I remember those times.
Yeah, yeah. And so if you got a refund, and now all of a sudden the lost or stolen checks are coming in, having been negotiated and paid, now Citicorp has paid for those checks twice.
Yeah.
So the department that I was managing opened a case, and they would go through the file and try to determine if this was a fraudulent case, if there was any reason to research it, if there was any possibility of recovering the second the second payment that the bank had to make. So it was a very interesting job, and that whole office was all paper files, and everything that you did was on paper. And they decided that they were going to put everything, build a system and do everything online, from the front office to the back office. And that's when my days in the IT world started, because I was assigned to work on that project because somebody that was doing the job had to spell out what this system had to do in order to replace a paper system. So that was my job. And then it went into, when the system was built, it had to be tested to make sure everything worked. And then somebody had to go train everybody.
Yes.
Then that was me. And the 4 places that had to be trained were the Tampa office, which was the worldwide headquarters. So that was a big group. And then they had large banking centers in Hong Kong, Singapore, and London. So I went out to train them. And that was quite an interesting experience because you're dealing with a whole new culture.
Yes.
The class in Hong Kong was the hardest class I've ever had to do. They were so stressed and so tense. It was as if it was life and death for them to learn that system. And it may well have been. They may have been told if they didn't learn it, wouldn't have a job anymore.
Yeah. So they all spoke English though, right?
Yes, they would, but they would speak English to me. And they spoke in their own language to each other. And you have to understand, these people had already worked a full day at the bank because you couldn't just close the bank down to have class. So they had to come to me every night for 5 nights from 5 o'clock in the evening till 9 o'clock at night.
Oh
And
my.
the bank would provide them with a box supper. And the way I worked it was I did all the lecture part in the first 2 hours. And then they broke up in groups of twos because there were not enough computers to go around.
Mhm.
And so they would be in computers out on the bank floor and on computers in private offices up and down the hall, just anywhere there was a computer that they could work on to learn the exercises. And the difficult part about it was while I encouraged them to ask questions, they just looked at me.
Hmm.
It's an instructor's nightmare. Nobody asked a question. And I
Yeah.
would stop and say, are you okay with that? Does anybody have a question? And nobody would ask a question.
Hmm.
And I came to the conclusion that maybe this had something to do with losing face. I don't know that for sure, but I had never experienced that before.
Yeah.
But what I discovered is when they broke up into twos and were working on the computer, then they talked to each other about the questions that they had.
Okay.
So what I had to do was literally walk around behind them all the time. So I could see if they were having a problem and step in and help them. It was a very hard class to
Yeah.
do.
So
But
that
at
was
the
a
end of the
cultural issue that you think, or
I
was it?
think it was. And I think it wasn't just in the office, because at the end of the week, they did great. But Friday was like final exam day, and they did very well on all of the exercises that they had to do. So I was able to demonstrate for their boss that they were trained.
Yeah.
Even on the outside, walking around in Hong Kong, people walked with their heads down. It was very important wherever it was they were going. Nobody was relaxed and just enjoying a stroll. I was not comfortable in Hong Kong, and that was very unusual because I'm not nervous by myself anyway.
Yeah.
So I just used the city tours to see some of Hong Kong. And the best part that I remember was the bus went up to Victoria Peak, which is the highest point in Hong Kong. At least it was when I was there. It was a mountain. And you could stand up there at the top of the mountain and see all of Hong Kong and the harbor. And across the harbor was China.
Hmm.
And I turned around and looked in the other direction, and there was the South China Sea. And I remember standing there looking down at the South China Sea and thinking to myself, Charlotte Cooper, how on earth did you end up here? But it was a good experience for me
Wow.
because it's
Charlotte,
not.
were you trained to train, so to speak? I mean, it sounds like, as
I
a.
wasn't. No, my theory was always assume they know absolutely nothing.
Uh-huh.
You have to tell them, turn on the computer or open the book. And I started there, and I always put myself in the seat of the student so that I was very careful not to leave things out. It's really hard to remember, in order to get someplace, I didn't tell them to press that key.
Yeah.
So I may well have done better because I wasn't trained than
Oh,
if I had been trained, because I was so careful to get everything in.
yeah.
And
So,
I went from there to Singapore,
mhm.
and that was a complete turnaround. The class was relaxed. They had a good time. They cheered when they got something right. They didn't hesitate to answer questions. Out in the outside world, people were friendly and smiling. The first day that I went to work, the cab driver is driving away from the hotel, and he says to me, "Good afternoon, madam. May I ask, please, where are you from?" And I said, "From the United States." And he said, "Where, please?" And I said, "Florida," with which he said, "Ah, Mickey Mouse." And then he immediately turned into a tour guide, and he pointed out that's where we surrendered to the Japanese. And in that building over there is Raffles. Does Madam know about Raffles? And Madam did know about Raffles. And he pointed out the noonday gun. And so I had a history lesson on Singapore between the hotel and the office, and it was a terrific experience. I really enjoyed it.
So it sounds like a very, very different experience, like you said. And then
Mhm.
I bet the third experience, you said London, correct? You
Yeah.
were teaching.
I had been to London before, so I knew what to expect. And it was, they were polite and not stressed, or it was just, once again, they were there from 5 to 9. And it was a little bit like, oh, here comes the American again. But the first night of class, they made it clear to me that they absolutely had to be out of there by 9 o'clock, or they would miss the last train home. And in London, if you miss the last train home, it's a real problem.
Yeah.
So I just said to them, if it gets to be 5 minutes of 9, feel free to get up and leave.
Oh,
Because I knew if I didn't do that, they were going to worry. Every night they were going to be worrying, looking at
Yeah.
their watch. So
Yeah.
I invited them to leave at 5 minutes of 9, so they could put that aside and we could go on with the class.
Wow.
And they did well. And actually, Bill came to London and joined me, and we were taking a 2-week vacation in England and in Scotland when I was finished. And while I was working, he was doing touring. He went to guy stuff like Churchill's bunker and Churchill's war room. And in the evening, I discovered he was, the hotel where we stayed had a cocktail hour with heavy hors d'oeuvres. It was really great. And he just went there and had the hors d'oeuvres and drink. And that was, he said, I didn't need to go to dinner. And it turned out he had become acquainted with a couple who was also staying at the hotel. And they would invite him to join them. And we met up in the elevator the third morning, and he was introducing me to them. And they were saying how much they enjoyed his company at the cocktail hour and hoped that he would be joining them this evening. And they were just charming people. And I was a little jealous,
I bet.
I would like to be in on this. And when we got off the elevator, we each went our separate way, and Bill was laughing. And I said, what? Are you laughing at me? And he said, Charlotte, they are Steve Martin's parents.
Oh.
Steve Martin, the entertainer.
Yeah.
You would never know that. They just came to London very frequently to go to the shows. And that's what they did. Every day they went to a show. So we went on and did our tour in England and in Scotland. And I got back to my office, and it was, thank you very much for a really good job. And now you don't have a job anymore.
Oh my goodness.
Because the project was finished and everything was running fine. But the position I had been in before I went on the project, somebody had to take it. You couldn't just sit there waiting. It was almost 2 years before the whole thing was finished.
Wow.
And so Citibank was downsizing, and the easiest people to let go were the ones that had been on the project because they weren't in an active position. But they gave me a very generous departure.
Yeah.
Severance package. Financial stipend, and the use of an employment agency where you could come to work. You could have a small office to work in, and you'd have on finding a job. And I got a phone call from a woman who had worked on the project with me, but she only worked on the specifications part when we were the very beginning of the project. And she had seen the handwriting on the wall. So she left, and she called me to say, send me your resume. There's an opening for a trainer in my office, and I'll hand walk your resume to the department head. And it was then known as GTEDS, which was GTE Data Services, which is now known as Verizon.
Oh, okay.
So that's who I was applying to for a training position. And I sent in my resume. I got a call from the department head secretary to make an appointment for an interview. And she said, plan on 3 hours.
Oh,
You need to come prepared to do a presentation. If you need any equipment to do your presentation, let me know and I'll make sure it's available. So this was the total opposite of the interview I had had going into Citibank. I had almost an hour one-on-one with the department head. And then we went into a conference room where I was to do this presentation. And there were 6 people sitting around the table and they had evaluation sheets and they were the other trainers in the department. So who better to watch me do my thing and evaluate whether or not I would be an addition to the department and then the people who I would be working with. So I did the presentation and it was a really cool presentation. I actually took it home when I left Citibank because I had designed it as kind of a light-hearted interview to the system I was going to be teaching for Citibank. And I used the house that Jack built and Jack as an analogy. And Jack is sitting in this office and he's up to his elbows in paperwork and there's files everywhere and there's rooms that don't have doors and he has to go outside and come back in. And I did the storyboards and put all the text on the storyboards, and then I drew a house and Jack is a stick figure, and I took it to the graphics guys in the office, and he put together the most fantastic presentation for me. It was just overheads, but he had these 2 characters, the house and Jack. And Jack was very frazzled at the beginning of the presentation. And as we went through what was going to happen, a description of what was going to happen, Jack could now go from room to room and the file cabinets started to disappear. And on the last screen, Jack is sitting at his desk. There is no paperwork. There are no file cabinets. All the rooms have doors. And the only thing on Jack's desk is a computer. And these characters just brought it to life. He did a great job. And I could see that there was no proprietary information in that presentation at all. So I felt free to take it home with me. And it was a big hit at GTED.
Oh my, that sounds
when they had the opportunity, the other trainers had the opportunity to ask me questions. And the first question was, did you draw those pictures? No. And then they all left and the department head came with an envelope in his hand and he said, the last part of your interview, I need you to write a training exercise. And the topic is in this envelope. You have 30 minutes to do it. I will leave you alone and be back in 30 minutes. And when I opened up the envelope, the topic was how to make a phone call. And I'm thinking, how am I going to make a training exercise out of this?
Yeah.
Well, pick up the phone, dial the number, wait for the person to answer. So I decided to take it from the point of view of somebody who had never even seen a telephone, because I had to put some information in there that would let them know that I had the ability to design some kind of a training material. So the first part of it was a description of different kinds of phones. This is a wall phone. This is a desk phone. This is a princess phone.
Ooh,
this is a pay phone. You have to put money in it to use it. And in the next section, I described the sounds they would hear on the phone. What did a dial tone sound like? What did a busy signal sound like? Now I've got enough text in there that I can finally get to the part where you pick up the phone, dial the number, and wait for the person to answer. And I finished it about 1 minute under time, and he walked in and picked it up from me, and his secretary took me to the door. And I went home and I walked in the house and I said to Bill, I think I might get this job.
It sounds like it.
Yeah, it was such a fantastic interview.
Yeah.
That I felt like I had been really been given the opportunity to demonstrate what I could do,
Yeah.
which was important.
Wonderful.
So I did. I got the offer, and I had a start date, and went into the department head's office, and he explained to me what I was going to be doing. I was strictly going to be writing and presenting the training. There was not anything involved with developing the system. It was already developed. And it was interesting because it was a system that GTEDs had built for the United States at a few years earlier, when there was deregulation and all the local phone companies were required to allow all the long distance carriers to use their equipment, to use their lines, to run the calls through their switching stations. So it was a big job, because you had to capture all those calls and all the time that those long distance companies were spending on the local carriers' equipment, so that they could bill them for that time. And so the same thing had happened in Canada. And they had to decide if they wanted to build their own system like GTEDs had done, or buy our system modified to meet some specific needs the Canadians had. And they elected to buy our system. So I wrote the training for that. And when I talked to my boss, I said, okay, GTED's customer is the Canadian telephone company. Who is my specific customer? And he looked at me kind of funny, and then he looked up at the ceiling and he said, Ottawa, Montreal, Toronto, Winnipeg, Calgary, and Vancouver. So I said, so everybody. And he said, yes. So I did that. I went out and did that training, and that was fabulous. Just great experience, because there weren't the confines of a banking regulations and banking hours. So we had an actual classroom, and we had all day to train. So there was
Charlotte,
a lot to learn.
Your career is amazing. So it was out of a necessity, because you got a divorce, and then you developed an incredible career. So let's come to the point when you retired and you came to the shores. How did that happen?
The Canadian project was finished, and when I came back to work, there were no new projects in the pipeline. There were projects that were being worked on, but at that point in time, there was no evidence of new business coming. So they let me go. There was nothing to assign me to do. And at that point, I was already 62.
Yeah.
And I wanted to work until I was 65. That was my goal. And so I was taking job interviews and trying to tone down what I could do, because they're not going to hire me at my age to do what I had been doing all these years, when they could hire somebody who probably had a master's degree in information technology right out of college, for a lot less than I was being paid at that point in time. And I took a number of interviews, and there was just nothing for me. And Bill, during that time, kept saying to me, you don't have to work. You can take retirement now. And so finally, after a while, I said to him, okay, show me the money. So we went and sat down at the computer, and he recapped all of our investments and where we were and what the future looked like. And I didn't work anymore after that day. That was it. I was retired. And it was wonderful, because he had already retired.
Okay.
So we were able to do things that we had done a little bit while we were working, but now we could, we volunteered at our church. We were both volunteers at Metropolitan Ministries in downtown Tampa. we went to school. We became Stephen ministers.
Yeah.
If you don't know what that is, a Stephen minister is a lay person who has been through 40 hours of training to be one-on-one with individuals in distress. So
Yeah.
it was something that was going on through our church. And the only person who knew who we were seeing was the pastor, because it was very confidential. And the pastor was the one that made the match between the Stephen minister and the person who was in need of somebody to talk to.
Yeah.
Most of the time, they just needed somebody to talk to. So we were able to do that. And we had this big house, and we kept talking about selling it, and we did a few things, and then we'd get involved somewhere else. And so the house was still there, which turned out to be a blessing, because my oldest daughter was diagnosed with early onset Parkinson's disease when she was 38 years old.
Sorry.
And it moved very swiftly and very hard in young people. So by the time she was 45, she needed a lot of help and a lot of attention. Her husband had already died. He was 50, I think, when he died of an infection in the VA hospital. And they had a son who was at that time 16, going on 17. And it got bad enough that we decided that we needed to bring them to live with us. So we had 2 spare bedrooms. And so we moved them in, and between Bill and me, we were able to take care of her. And then we had this teenager that was part of the mix.
Yeah.
And this poor kid has lost his dad. His mother is disappearing before his eyes. And now he's moved in with grandparents who have rules. And he was not accustomed to rules because his mother spoiled him. He was her fair-haired child. So he was a little bit rebellious and a little hard to deal with. But we finally got on track, and he managed to put up with us, and we put up with him, and I actually enjoyed having him with us. And then one day, the doorbell rang, and the police officer was at the door, and he had come to tell us that our grandson and his girlfriend had died in a car accident.
Oh, I'm sorry, Charlotte.
So now we have to tell our daughter that, as sick as she was. And we got through that, and she was with us for, I think, 2.5 more years. And we got to the point where we had to get help because she was completely helpless at that point, and we had to feed her. And Bill was just fantastic. There was nothing he wasn't willing to do to help her, and nothing she wasn't willing to have him do for her. And they had a great relationship. And eventually we had hospice. They were with us for almost a year. And they're just wonderful. And they provided us with the equipment we needed to deal with this. And we bought a van that was a handicap van, so we could just push her in her wheelchair into the back of the van and take her places. And the caregiver that we hired would come on Saturday morning, take her in the van. She loved to go to garage sales. She had done that all her life. And so we did everything we could to give her a life that had a little something to it.
Yeah.
But then she died.
Oh, Charlotte, I'm sorry.
Yeah, that was a rough, I think that was all in about a 4, maybe 5 year time span. And that was a rough time. The day after she died, I was sitting in the living room, and Bill came out, and he just looked at me and he said, "So what do we do now?" And that's kind of where we were, because everything had been so driven for us. The need for what we needed to do. Now we were on our own. And at our church, our pastor was taking a sabbatical. And we had another pastor who came and filled in for him while he was gone. and her name was Claudia Henderson, and she was the chaplain at Suncoast.
Oh, okay.
So we had her at our church for 2 months in the summer, and
Mhm.
everybody just loved her. And we got very friendly with her. And one Wednesday night dinner, she did a presentation on Suncoast.
Oh,
And as we're driving home, Bill says to me, I think we should go check that place out. And I said, okay, that sounds like a good day's excursion. So we went to Suncoast, and Claudia met us and toured us all around. And then she said, I'm going to take you to lunch at the Shores. It's just 2 miles over here, and you can see what the Shores is like. So we sat in the dining room at the six top in the window, looking out on the water. Somebody joined us from marketing, and Jan Banker joined us.
Mhm.
And we had, of course, we had the special treats. We had the menu and the plated food and everything that goes along with being a prospect.
Mhm.
Rosie was our server.
Oh
And
my.
she went around the table taking orders. And when she got to Bill, he said to her, I see you have chicken cacciatore on the menu. I like that. I think I'll have that. With which Rosie said, no, I think you should have the Bahama burger today. He said, okay. And after we moved over here, that was the relationship they had. When we went to eat, if Rosie was in our section, he would say, what am I having today, Rosie? And she would tell him, and that's what he'd have.
Oh, wow.
So while we were here, they took us to a model apartment that was upstairs in Bahama Place. And we looked at that, and there were brochures on the counter for Little Bayou. They hadn't even stuck a shovel in the ground yet for Little Bayou. And Bill took the paperwork that was there home, and he called, and I heard him asking for all of the financial information they were willing to share.
Yeah.
So he got a big package, and he went through it, and we were getting information in the mail. We got the shorelines every month. We were invited to events over here. That works.
Yes,
It really
yes, I
works.
bet it does.
I was very reluctant. I did not want to leave my church. I did not want to leave my doctor. The only thing I knew about St. Petersburg at that time was the route from 275 to the beach. I had never been in St. Petersburg, but I have just come to really love St. Petersburg. I like it better than Tampa.
Wonderful.
In terms of its downtown and the things it has to offer, like museums and theaters and restaurants, and it's way past Tampa in that. So Bill didn't push me too hard. He gave me quite a bit of time to think about it, and there was a pre-construction package if you bought in early. And he said, this is worth putting a deposit down now. And he said, if at the point in time when we're about to make the final decision, if you still don't want to do it, we can always back out.
Yeah.
So that's what we did. And as time went by, I got more used to the idea. And they were telling us an October occupancy. So we thought we would put our house on the market in June. And maybe that would be a good, because the market was pretty good then. So that might be a good time frame. And of course, June turned into December. But we put the house on the market, and we made the deposit on Little Bayou, and so we were all set and ready to go. And we put the house on the market, and it sold in 6 days.
Oh my.
And the people paid cash, and they wanted 30 days occupancy. So we really had to move. We had to get going and pack up. So what we ended up doing was putting half of our stuff in storage and bringing half of our stuff with us and living in a villa for 6 months.
That's what a
until we
lot of
could
people
move
do.
into
Yeah.
Little Bayou. Yep. And
Wow.
that's how we came to live at the Shores. And I feel so grateful to spend my last years here. especially with what's happening to me with my eyes.
Yeah.
There are friends who are so considerate. You know, I get phone calls. I'm going to the store. Do you need anything?
Mm-hmm.
You know, you don't have to ask. People step up and offer to help you. That's just what it is at the stores. And I appreciate being here.
Yeah.
I'm so glad to know all the people who live here. The interesting, fun, exciting, caring people, and not to mention the staff, who are just tops.
Well,
So
it sounds like Rosie, our Rosie, who's
Rosie does it again. Yes, she did.
30 some years, 33, 35. But Charlotte, looking back on your life, and I'm sorry for the hardship
Right.
that those years must have been really tough. What got you through it? Is there something, and especially now, this time that we're in, again, hardship, what got you through it? Like, it must have been so hard to stay upbeat and stay positive, and you seem to be such a positive person.
I think I am. Well, part of it was there was no choice. We had to do this. I had to do it when it was me alone. And
Yeah.
when it was Bill and I together, this is what you have to do. And so you did it. And when I look back on the number of times something happened, how many times a job went right out from underneath me,
Mm-hmm.
and I thought it was the end of the world, it always seemed to lead me to something better that I would not have experienced had it not been for this bump that was tough to take. And that happened to me several times over. And in my older years, I started to think, you know, I've done this in the wrong direction. I should have learned this backwards, because it would have been much easier to go through all those things if I could have, at that time, been more confident, and just had the faith that everything was going to work out, because eventually it did.
Yeah.
And I was so lucky to have Bill Cooper in my life, because he was there when the bad stuff happened.
Yeah.
And he shared everything with me, and you couldn't have asked for a better person to spend your life with than him.
That's
I'm
wonderful.
grateful
Charlotte.
every day for him. He is why I am here.
Yes, and we're so happy you are here. And you know, I love that you said, you know, every time a door closed, and what's now something better, actually something that was maybe more suitable for you, or that was a step in the right direction, and to see it that way is just wonderful. And I think that's a great life philosophy. And I remember my mother saying that, you know, the lifespan is the same length, whether you spent it crying or laughing.
That's a really good point.
Yes. So it seems to me like that you always could come out of a difficult situation and see the positive and move on. And I'm feeling for you to lose a daughter and, you know, a grandson and her husband in such a short time. So I'm so glad you shared with us, and you're a remarkable woman in the career you embarked on and the experiences. You are such a beacon of light, Charlotte.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I have enjoyed every minute of it, and I am eternally grateful for it all.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody. I know you're all probably delighted and touched by Charlotte's life, and I'm grateful you shared it with us, Charlotte. Thank you so very much.
You are welcome. Thank you.
Thank you.